G'day and welcome to another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups. On this episode, we have my mate's 1275 A+ engine from his Mini. We're going to be rebuilding it. I'm going to show you every step of the way how to pull it apart and how to put it back together. So the first thing we're going to be doing is removing the tapper cover, and then we're going to be getting ahead onto removing the exhaust, followed by removing the rocker shaft and then the head bolts. Now, make sure that when you're working on a classic car, you use the right sockets, whether it's imperial, metric, whatever it may be, make sure you're using the right tools for the job. Now, make sure also that when you're pulling stuff apart, you separate them in boxes and label them clearly. That way you know where they go and how it goes back together, rather than rummaging through that big pile of bolts we spoke about last time and spending hours trying to find the right bolt to suit the right application. Okay, so in my case, I'm going to use a couple of old yogurt containers. Now, the story behind this engine is that he had it rebuilt several years ago, but the guy that rebuilt it never gave him a receipt or any information as to what was done. He actually asked the guy, "Can you get this running for me?" The guy said, "Yep, no worries." After almost 12 months of it sitting around and several $1,000s, he returned him this engine and then said, "Hey, I haven't actually got it started, but here's the bill." So he asked me to pull it apart for him and for us to check it all out. Now, hopefully, most of the work's already been done. Things like converting to unleaded would be the most ideal thing. If it's been bored out, then we can measure the cylinders and cross-reference them with the standard size. If not, when we take it to the machine shop, they'll let us know what needs to be done. Now, because it's been sitting for so long, everything's going to be quite tight, but that's fairly normal. So we lift the tapper cover off, and we put that aside. Now the next step we're going to be doing is removing the exhaust. Now all of this is able to be done inside the car, but considering I've got the engine out, it makes it significantly easier. And any of those people out there watching who don't own a Mini, until you've worked on a Mini or owned one yourself, you don't realize how small they actually are, but also how much room you don't have as well. So having the engine out does mean the world of justice in terms of getting access to absolutely everything without finding stuff and burning or even hurting myself. Okay, so once the exhaust is undone, we can then shimmy it off and put that to the side. Now I'll just put it under my car for this time, that way it's out of the way. Now that we've got the exhaust off, the next thing we're going to be doing is removing the rocker shaft. Now the correct procedure to do this is going to be to time the engine and then remove the head. Now, because we're going to do a full rebuild, it's not going to matter so much now, solely because whatever position we pull apart is going to be in a completely different position when we put it all back together. And because we're starting from scratch with everything apart, we can then time it down the track. Now, when you loosen and tighten things, there's always a particular sequence. Make sure you consult your owner's manual or workshop manual as to how to do it in which order. Now there's always the right tool for the job, like I was saying before. We're going to use a set of deep sockets to be able to remove these nuts on the threads that we can't get access to using a shallow socket. Now comes the time in which we're going to be removing the cylinder head bolts. So what we're going to be doing is doing it in a particular sequence. It is always ideal, if you don't have your workshop manual in front of you, to start in the middle and then work your way out, creating a larger circle as you work. So in this case, we're going to be starting here. We're going to be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in that order. Now for this job, we're going to be using a 1/2 inch breaker bar solely because of the tightness that they're going to be. Now we've got all the nuts off, I'm just going to quickly talk about knowing the internals of an engine, and specifically how to know if it is in any good condition or not. Now, if you find a vehicle that's been sitting around for a long time and you're unsure whether it's going to run, a good thing to do is to take the tablet cover off, or at least look through the oil fill hole at the top and see if you can see any oil. If there's no oil there, it's probably been sitting for a very long time, or it's been drained and it hasn't had any lubrication whatsoever. Now this is a little bit damp. After sitting for 13 years, it's in still very good condition. There's a very light residue of oil in different places, but it tells me that oil has been moving around through here, so it's actually been lubricated, which is a very good step. If it was completely bone dry, it's very hard to say without stripping the engine and looking at the oil pump to know exactly what sort of condition it is internally. Now make sure that when you remove a cylinder head, if you're going to be facing it down, you face it on a piece of cardboard or something soft. That way you're not going to damage it. Also put it out of the way that you're not going to trip over it, fall, slip, scratch it, because if you do, you're going to be in for a very expensive time. Now, as you can see, the head has started to lift off the deck a little bit. The deck is what we call the top of the cylinder block. Now, because it's not coming up any further, it's because the push rods, the orifice where it sits on the rocker arm itself, which is this little lobe here, it's too big to fit through the cylinder head. So what we need to do next is remove the rocker shaft, and then we can remove the push rods. Now sit that one off to the side. Now it is good practice to try and put these in order. That way you know which way they came out and how they're going to go back in. Especially if it's a worn engine, you want to know that over time, that if they have worn, that they've worn specifically to that cylinder. But in our case, we might be replacing them. Just to be sure, I'm going to put them in order. So as you pull each one out, just have a bit of a look. You can see here there is some oil, which is good. Right, so now the push rods are out, the cylinder head will slide straight off. And off she comes. Now, as you can see here, it appears that they have put a new head gasket on there at some stage, obviously when they've probably rebuilt it originally, but also it's a very clear indication that they haven't done any honing whatsoever. Now, I'll just try and remove this head gasket and then I can show you the internals. So now that I've got the cylinder head gasket off, you can see along here that they haven't replaced any pistons whatsoever because of the carbon deposits on there as well. Now, if you look very closely on the cylinder, see that ring right around the edge of the cylinder wall, how it looks relatively dirty. That's all carbon deposits. As the piston travels up, anything that's inside the cylinder gets pushed to the top and then creates a ring. That is completely normal for a worn engine or one that's just been used frequently but hasn't been rebuilt to have that build up on there. Now with this one you can actually see how it's yellow at the top and then it's silver with a crosshatch of the machining that's been done at some stage. You can actually feel a lip between the silver and the gold section at the top of the cylinder bore.